the mind moves in a caring manner before the body. And minds have tended to, on this earth, to care primarily for themselves first, and that has been a requirement. But I feel once we master individual survival, then there's only one avenue left, and that is mastering collective survival. That means when you wonder about the evolution of an advanced species, you see the evolution of its ability to confront different circumstances. And so for the first time, I feel, especially in 2020, where life has become pushed more indoors, I feel it's a suggestion that the world wants us to, in some sense, notice our eyes before we move. And the eyes of man lead to sight, but how sight is present is more than the eyes. That means we say that the eyes, the biological eyes, they receive the sensory perception, but then there is a processor. There is a data processor behind your eyes that is your identity. So in some sense, the data processor is finding itself to have access to sensory perception and also deviations on sensory perception, which means that there is in some sense an inner space. And every living being on this planet that has in some sense found itself in the human form has had inner space. And then when you really look at creatures in nature, their inner space is not separate from their ecosystem. Man is the only species, humanity is the only species, the Homo sapien, that in some sense we have separated our mind from our world to see the world again, to see the world anew. And the silent revolution is this kind of urge that we as a species have had to worship language, to search for language, to search for subjects, only to realize that there's still an objective walk. You know, you can think as if you are a cloud, you can think that you are the sky, you can think that you are in some sense the sun, only to realize that you are the viewer of them. And what I mean by that is that every person has an archetypal stance, and I think this was Carl Jung's great contribution, that he came to and saw that, for example, I mean, it wasn't just Carl Jung, many philosophers build up on each other's work, you know, as if philosophers are philosophers of the same planet, regardless of when they're born. I have looked at my life in many ways. I have looked at the body in the mirror, I have closed my eyes and wondered of the dweller, that is the observer of the subject. And I noticed something very interesting. That silence is not silence, that in the silence moments of, most silent, externally silent moments of my life, my inner realms have raged. And it's kind of like this, that there is some force that originates from behind our eyes. And I have been trying to consider this, and I've looked at the mainstream, and sure, you can totally, in some sense, say that there's some mysteriousness of the brain that we don't understand. We can think that consciousness is an organ, but I feel that regardless of what it is, regardless of where it arises from, it's a reception. It's the entrance of novelty behind your eyes before you move. So how does a person that's going in the same place every day, for example, let's say you have one of those kind of jobs, where every day you're going in the same place, why is it that you don't have the emotions as you did yesterday? Because the winds of the inner realms have changed you. You see, there's a concept I created, hopefully I will make a channel about it, but it's called the winds of evolution, and it is one of the most intense concepts my mind has reached, because in some sense it is the wind between the branches that moves the branches of visibility. That means we look at the observable universe and we're like, yo, we see forces, you know, push and a pull. But then we're like, wait a minute, who's observing the push and the pull, you know? And so there is this suggestion that your free will is an inner force, and this inner force can be controlled, but the concept of control has been so savagely objectified that we may never know what it means to control a subject unless we choose to revert. The silent revolution behind our eyes is not the revolution in the sense of self. It's not selves picking up pitchforks running in the street. The silent revolution is when you realize the value of your eyes from nullification towards infinity. You, dear being, whoever you are, does your sight have value? And you will see it has two types of value. If you act, it has kinetic value. But if you in some sense just sit still, you're like potential. Every time, you don't know, let me tell you, anger is like a slingshot. Have people noticed this? Like it builds up, ta! Like suddenly gets done. So, welcome to the chat section, Jake. So very interesting question. I'm going to share your comment, Jake. So guys, Jake in the chat section says, I always wondered if it would be possible to feel as if your thinking is happening somewhere other than behind the eyes. Like I've heard of people who feel their sense of self in their chest instead of through your thoughts. Yeah. You see, that's the thing. There's even a more fascinating argument. Welcome, peace, love, dove. So Jake, let me tell you this. I have, you don't know how many, I've pretty much, if the concept of consciousness was a duel, I have in some sense dueled many people. And I can tell you, there's an explanation on consciousness that we will never be able to figure it out because it's a social construction. That means the moment we became a social creature, the moment we were more than our individuality, consciousness cannot be located individually. Like there is that idea. But I personally feel that this body is an occurrence. And so before we think we're a body in a world, there's just a moment where I call it the happening, the great happening. Like stuff is just happening. It's like before order, chaos is there. And there's so many random particles moving in space. I mean, think about your own physical body right now. These atoms that have come to be you. You go ask a scientist and they will tell you you're made of stars. That means we don't just look at stars. We are made of them. Not only the light that enters our eyes, but on an elemental level, we are the ancient universe into opening its eyes and its modernity. So I can tell you this, that in my experience, the body is very crucial. Without a body, there's no, why do you need a mind? Why do you need to even know that you have a mind? Why do you need to even, if there's a chance, here's what I'm saying. We are, let's say, creatures in two dimensions. One dimension is selfhood. Anytime you've seen individuals, you've seen yourself as an individual, you've seen shapes, that's selfhood. But awarenesshood. Awareness is something else. Awareness is suddenly putting your hand on a horse's neck and feeling how tired the horse is. Awareness is the emotional clarity that arises from the right thoughts being engaged. There's something about nature that it's living before we animate it into lifeless ideas. The revolution, or let me say it like this, there's been many revolutions in history when you really look at it, but the revolutions have started, the revolts have started through injustice. But now, when you look, for example, okay, here, let me say it like this, the revolutions you see in history, it was the injustice. It was the injustice from external circumstances. But what if there is an injustice from internal circumstances? That is a silent revolution where only you can pick up your eyes again. You know, I remember reading this statement. I don't know from where, but it was from I can tell you it was from a context way before I was born. And the statement was that the mind is a lousy master, but it is a great servant. And so human beings look at them. You know, we're running towards self help sections of books. We're running towards anything that makes us see ourselves in different ways, only to realize that we are the infinite potential of view. You are the torchbearer of novelty. And when you realize this, life changes. When I realized that the new was worth more than the past, I broke to myself 1,000 times. And do you know how much you have to let go? You know, I experienced this, I wouldn't say horrific, but I experienced this intense moment like a year ago. And in that intense moment, I saw the empty handedness of my mind. I saw that my body is holding on to my mind. You know, not my mind is holding on to my body. And the moment my attention goes from the body, I am the moment where the potential is not known. So at some point, man will eventually, inevitably, not now, maybe like in a couple 100 years, probably go into a state where his trust of his reality will become so inseparable from his trust of his inner realm. Right now, there's a deviation. There's something different about the world you see behind your eyes and the world in front of it, because the world behind your eyes shows you the potential, but the world in front of your eyes shows you what potential is, in some sense, came about, what happened. You know, when I, for example, look at these Mr. Within talks, do you know how many casualties there has been? Do you know how many talks I'd given where suddenly the file was corrupt or the hard drive, somebody threw it at a door? Like, that was such a unique, that was technically a divine moment when somebody threw my hard drive at a door where 300 of my talks got destroyed. And I was like, okay, God. You know? The silent revolution is finding a mirror that no longer lies to you about the potential that must be projected. That means after some point there is no lie, there is no truth. You're just a creature in a grand occurrence, and in certain phases of your life you're conscious of it, and certain phases, for example in dream states, your mind moves your body. You know, but when you're awake, your body moves your mind. You know, and when you're in deep sleep, the world is you. You have become the world. Every time I sleep, I'm like, all right, time to be earth again, time to just be stuff. So, guys, my attention wasn't on the chat section. I'm not sure what that was to repeat. But here's the thing, all I'm saying is that there's a presence before there's a personality, and when you acknowledge it in the day, you suddenly are aware of everything more. You see, you gotta ask yourself, what is moving in your moment? And there's a Zen story between these two imperial guards, and they ask each other, yo, they see a flag, they're bored, these imperial guards back in the day, and they see a flag and they're like, is the flag moving? You know, or is the wind moving? They're fighting and they see the sage and they go up to the sage and they're like, kind sage, which is moving, tell us now. And the sage looks at them and says, your mind has moved from the beginning, none of those two. And so when you realize your mind, this is a very incredible concept, guys, but when you realize your mind is the mover of your meaning, wouldn't you want to watch its movement? And so the movement, and it's kind of like this, when the external movement is limited or slows down, you become conscious of inner movement. That means if whoever you are right now, if you suddenly in the middle of the day, suddenly, let's say you're like the CEO of this huge company, you're in a suit. And if you suddenly stop, you will see how movement is happening. And if you notice in these talks of mine, I realize something. I realize something that many of us don't. That language is dualistic, which means it has two horizons. That means imagine our sky has a twin. For me, what I have found to be divine, or when I use that word, is when I have felt to be a movement alongside a collective mind. I'm not joking, guys. I think there is something like this. I think that our future selves are actually a collective being. I feel that every person who's thought that there is a God, they have in some sense realized what they have been, not what there is outside. And so what that means is that there is a level of freedom where ideas stop bothering you. And when ideas stop bothering you, it's as if the clouds fade and you see. You suddenly see the rawness of experience before ideology in your own being. And when you see that rawness, it's like a stop. It's like literally like every memory of your sense of self suddenly for a second just stops moving. And there's the grand vanishing of the archetypal being, you know. I'll give you an example of a vanishing of the archetypes of this being. There was this very, very liberated being named Rishi Vyasa, where some in the Indian tradition, and he's the author of the Gita and the Puranas and the Mahabharata, the great epic, you know, in Indian culture. And Rishi Vyasa, there's a very incredible story about him, but I'll tell you this, that he finds himself this grand seer of thought. He finds himself, in some sense, writing 18 books on the evolution of society and culture through grand metaphors of preserving certain psychological factors in those metaphors. He writes 18 books on giant leaves. So imagine writing books on leaves. You know, right now I have sometimes I find it kind of like inconvenient that I gotta, you know, record, edit, upload, you know. But back in the day, can you imagine writing on leaves? That means if there was one wind, the leaf would fall. You're like, oh no, you know, my notebook, became a dry leaf. But really, what Rishi Vyasa does is after he writes those 18 Puranas, what happens is that, and as the story says, an angel through human form, that means an angel through the form of a human, comes to him and says, Rishi Vyasa, you will not be content, you will not feel complete until you write about your love for the truth. And so Rishi Vyasa, this man who has dared look at civilization, a civilization that perhaps you don't know how stories are important. Stories are your inner civilization. You know? And Rishi Vyasa realizes in that moment. And he starts writing about his devotion. He lets his devotion for truth, a resonance prior to thought, move his hands. And he writes the Gita, the story of Arjuna and Krishna. How in some sense the unfathomable potential of the universe not dared, but in some sense cared to step towards man. There's something many mystical, I can't tell you, it's hilarious. This concept of returning to some sort of primordial home. It is in so many mystical traditions. Take it from the dervish tradition, you know, from the yogic tradition, Vedic tradition, you know, to even many of the Oriental factions, you know. It becomes something where the heart doesn't work with thoughts, if you notice. It works whether you have a thought or not. Your heart doesn't care about your idea. It's like the mind is like, you know, caring for the heart, and then the heart is like, yo, don't distract me, mind, I'm just beating right here. The thing is that certain parts of our intelligence, they are just there, and they are nature's movement, and they are how you learn from nature as yourself. You think you only learn from nature from like the National Geographic Channel? You can learn from nature because you're being it. If you were a robot, if you were an AI that was conscious, the conversation would be totally different. That means if, for example, I was living in my own science fiction novel and a robot came and asked me, and they're like, what am I? I'll be like, you're the program of the unknown. And that is as far as it can go, really. You know, that means unless the person is ready to step beyond their inner realms, everything else will be unknown to you. It is only experience that holds on to the true memory. So I would say our hearts, peace, love, dove in the chat section, I would tell you that our hearts are, they're not just intelligent, they are in tune with nature's intelligence. That means, can you look at a heart, like someone's heartbeat, and be like, yo, that heartbeat is dishonest? You can't. You see, certain things that naturally happen, you gotta realize human existence cannot occur with some level of certainty and some level of uncertainty. If you're 100% certain, you have no reason to move. If you're 100% uncertain, you're moving without stopping. And so some people thought mysticism was just uncertainty, was dissolution of the archetype of the individual and into some dissolution of the higher realms. But I will tell you, I don't feel that is the case. I feel that there is a question without words being asked, and only the presence of the being has access to that question. The silent revolution is how people are discovering or realizing their own injustice of their inner realms. That means, you see, sure, the external realm could be chaotic. You could be 1 out of 8 billion people thrown in this world, and messed up things happen. They happen all the time. But the issue is not that we should stop chaos. We should throw chaos out of our civilization. Chaos is still intelligent, but it's intelligent without direction. And that is the difference. Do you know why violence is easier than helping? Because helping, you have to direct it. You have to literally, if it was a laser beam, you have to point it. But you can see violence, you don't care. You use it like a lightsaber. You just like, whatever. This is my view on all violent people. There's a story of this Zen monk who feels sorry for a warlord who's destroying all the monks. And I'll tell you the story. This warlord doesn't like monks. I don't know why. Maybe he asked a monk a question and the monk was silent, so he's like, I hate these silent people. But this warlord, excuse me. This warlord says, no, monks are unnecessary. Destroy all temples in some sense. And kill all the monks. He commands it to his generals. And his generals are like, alright, we're killing monks, I guess. And the general goes, what can the general say? The general is trusting the system that feeds him. And so the general, in some sense, goes, and the warlord goes and checks in many towns, and the monks realize this. The monks are like, holy shit, psychopaths killing monks on a mass scale. Like, let's run to the mountains. And all the young monks run to the mountains. Until the warlord arrives at one town where there was a very sacred temple. And there's a strange situation where as the warlord is walking in, he suddenly sees, like, there's an old monk sitting, very old monk, sitting on this grassland, peacefully closing his eyes. And none of the soldiers want to kill this old monk when his eyes are closed, And so, what do you call it? It's as if human decency is being the spirit guide of that monk, is being the guardian angel of that monk. The warlord sees this. He sees that nobody is killing this monk. He gets angry. His grip finds his sword, the handle of his sword, and he's squeezing the handle of his sword as if he can't wait to kill this being. And in that moment, he just shouts in front of everybody. He shouts and he says, "Monk, come here!" Like shouting it savagely, warlord style. And when he does this, the monk opens his eyes gracefully, stands up, and all the guards and everybody is watching. The monk walks closer to the furious warlord. The warlord looks at him, comes closer and says, "Do you know who I am? I can have my sword in your stomach in an instant." The sage is like, "Holy shit, man, calm down." No, sorry guys, the sage looks at him, and the sage is standing as if his presence is the elder of the moment, not his personality. The sage looks at him, the monk, and says, "Do you know who I am?" And the warlord is shocked that this monk has even answered. The monk says, "Do you know who I am? I can have your sword in my stomach in an instant." And the warlord looks in the eyes of this monk and sees the fearlessness of how he has realized he's a mind. You see, people can the body can be pushed and pulled around, but the mind cannot. The mind is present. It is as if it's the law of your matter. Your free will is your set of inner laws upon the world. And your inner laws are based on how the world has sculpted you so far. That means I respect my parents, but I realize without the whole world, what am I? Without the other, what am I? Without the collective, how are we individuals? How have we been able to endure so long? Because there is this vision. There's this momentum behind the eyes of man that I am alive today. That is the hope. As long as you got energy, exert effort, and eventually it will go somewhere. There's this idea that certain cultures, you can say, they saw this idea of an old soul. Certain cultures that saw reincarnation and whatnot. They saw an old soul and they saw a young soul. And they asked them, "What do you mean?" What do you mean? How could the soul have age? And you see, it's as if the old soul is, if you see, how can I tell you? Mistakes are made by the ancient. Solutions are found by the modern. I don't know, it was this kind of idea I had come across where it was as if like the old soul will be more like their ego will be foolish. And the reason is that the fool has to make the mistakes so the others see. So there was this idea that sometimes when you see a fool, they could be a very old soul, because they have chosen to progress the moment through. They have chosen to bring the inefficiency quicker, so the efficiency happens quicker. Anyways, let's move on. The whole point of this silent revolution is that I can't tell you, since 2015 I've been fascinated by this concept that this new renaissance will happen, but it will be a multidimensional renaissance, and it would be how all the inner realms of people are being poured out, because we're starting to notice that if we were being watched by visitors, that would be the most intelligent activity. There are two technologies. When you look at a human being, what is some advanced things the human being can do? The human being can physically move. That's advanced. You can be like some guy who does parkour or something, or they, in some sense, move their inner realms. So you can move your outer realms in advanced ways, and you can move your inner realms in advanced ways. But just like the guy who's ran up so many walls to be able to kind of do that parkour, the person has accumulated a sort of experiential relativity. That means anything that opens up to your experience becomes skill. Anything that you do that is not allowed access in through the gates of the paradise of your experience, in some sense it is forgotten. You know. And there's something cool, guys. There's this concept I was speaking about old souls. Here, I'll tell you. In Persian mythology, there is a bird, which is the phoenix, but they call it Seymour. And the Seymour was known to be this legendary bird that, in some sense, had lived through three apocalypses. You know, sometimes even in Vedic thought, in certain yogic books, you find people, for example, in the Puranas, you suddenly see like there was this dude that lived through 7,500 apocalypses. You know, it's like, yeah, man, I just got the time. You know. Oh man, what can I say? The unknown moves knowledge, the known moves the unknown, and we call this dance civilization's rise and fall. I feel that now that we are conscious is the greatest opportunity. And I feel the moment the person takes into consideration how long history is, they will feel they got a millisecond to act. You know? And this may sound strange, but I feel what is happening to this archetype of the phoenix, of this creature of uh, the flame of wisdom. In some sense, it dies, and then it is reborn. You know, it's like the Buddhist is like, yeah, you are eternal, but you're endlessly incarnating. You'll be like, thanks, man. But I think the whole point Buddha had was that you get out of suffering. And if reincarnation is causing you suffering, you get out of it. It's like this. It's like some people are in the store to buy something. Some people are in the store to work as employees. Some people are in the store and they don't want anything. And there has been many mystics throughout the eons that in some sense they have looked upon this world and they're like, no thank you. They've Mahasamadi'd out of here. They've Satchidananda out of here. They've reverted themselves back to a simpler dimensional presence of energy. You see, guys, here's the thing. Your inner realms can be worse than what you see, or they can be better. And this distinction is the biggest factor in how you will be a human being. That when you open your eyes, do you see room to move, or is it too crowded to do anything? I feel there's so much room to move. And when I looked at academia, I'm like honestly, educational system in 2020 on a global scale, I'll comment on this. It's literally like the educational system is Jon Snow from the Game of Thrones, Like that lady's looking at him, it's like, you know nothing, Jon Snow. It's like, and all those people who in some sense go through the educational system, they come out in life and they're like, wait a minute, did this educational system prepare me only for one dimension, but there's so many dimensions in life? And so that is not real education. Education is experiential. That means if you're a person who's been playing in front of the computer a lot, go climb a tree. I would do that as a kid. It's like, what did you do when video games hadn't been invented yet? You'd climb trees. You'd realize life was the video game. There are certain phases in this book I'm writing called Civilization 2.0, Sky Cities, Earth, Heaven, and Advancement Beyond the Language Threshold. The title may change, but for now that's it. In it, I've spoken about certain great transformations. This silent revolution behind our eyes is one. It's the multidimensional renaissance. It's when human beings realize art tolerates. Art tolerates. And so we should not try to be saints or sinners. We should try to be artists. We should choose to be designers. Because on a designer view, you really don't have a character in a story. Right now, I'm looking at the design of this cup in front of me. Do I think this is a good cup? Do I think this is a bad cup? No, it's just design. It's just existential position, phenomena. So you see, everything is existential phenomena, and it is how we move that our attention begins weaving the story of the red carpets that open for us. I feel it's like this. In every moment of your life, there's two types of strength a person has. You have the strength of yourself, and you have the strength of your awareness. The strength of yourself can't be there if your awareness fears itself. If you fear how you are an unknown phenomena, if there is a tiny percentage of feeling you don't know, let me tell, not feeling you don't know. Not feeling you don't know the knower. That's what I mean. Yeah. There's a story of this man named Guru Arjan. And Guru Arjan, he comes to us from the Sikh tradition. And if I tell you how I found out about this person, how the name Guru Arjan came to me, was that it was like this random day where my father and my brother, they had found this kind of like meetup, like kind of like yoga meetup and something. And we go to this, and there's this, you can say European gentleman, who it was as if his psychology was like an Indian person. It was like seeing in, he didn't even, like the way, it was as if he had been in India for so long that something from his eyes had changed, and he wasn't just his cultural program. And so we were there, we go in this house, and it's this one man there, and me, my brother, and thing were the only people that went to see this guy's meetup. We were like the only ones that showed up, and it was in like this house. And I remember the moment I go in the house, it was a Sikh house. It was a very, very elegant house. And on the wall, there were these 10 figures, which the moment I saw these 10 figures, I think it was the 10th one. I think it was, there was this one of those figures, my attention was locked on it. I literally couldn't move my eyes away from one of these figures and this picture on the wall of this meetup on yoga that my father and brother had found. And when we went there, the guy started speaking of how he was in the presence of this very realized being that he used the word master, you know, and he suddenly spoke about how his name was Gopal Singh, and it was like this very liberated man in the Sikh tradition. Anyways, so the man speaks, but my attention is locked down. And then the guy notices my attention locked on one character, one person. And I'm like, who is that person, like, in that picture of those 10 gurus? And he says Guru Arjan, right? And that was the first time I heard the term Guru Arjan. And I looked into his quotes and into his ideology and who he was. And a part of me he was a compiler. He was this enlightened, very enlightened being that had allowed his intelligence to access various dimensions. So he was like a politician, a compiler, a liberated guru teaching yoga, like, and whatnot. Now, this story of Guru Arjan, I'm going to read you his quotes, and he had one of the most intense endings to a lifetime. And as a, honestly, I feel like on some level, nature has its wilderness that is unapologetic. But on some level, Guru Arjan, there was a Persian king that caused them a lot of suffering, you know? And as a Persian guy, seeing Guru Arjan, it's like, sorry, man. But honestly, here's the thing. The story is that this man, here's the thing. There was ideological warfare, and Guru Arjan was like rebelliously standing for his truth, but the overthrowing kind of force at the time kind of is cruel. And they in some sense tortured Guru Arjan in a very cruel way. And Guru Arjan, a divine and very like able, a very like they called him. There was this yogi, this man who had powers, who had like spiritual powers, and he comes to Guru Arjan, and he tells to Guru Arjan, "I can get you out of this. I can use my power. Do you want me to?" And Guru Arjan says no, and he takes the path of Socrates. History books should talk about Guru Arjan. And he says no. And then his quotes are like, if I find those quotes and read it for you, it'll make your eyes tear. Because he is saying, as if like his body is being destroyed, but he is still, his mind is standing eternally, standing its ground eternally. You know, it's, man. Sorry guys, I need to, So guys, we're gonna go into a quote tunnel of some of Guru Arjan's quotes. And he says, "He who lowers his mind to the dust of all men's feet sees the name of God enshrined in every heart." Guru Arjan says, "Don't create enmity with enmity. Don't create enmity with anyone, as God is within everyone. By the grace of God, I am cured of the disease of egotism, and death no longer terrifies me." Guru Arjan says, "The Lord of man and beast is working in all. His presence is scattered everywhere. There is none else to be seen." Guru Arjan says, "Thou, O Lord, art my father, and thou my mother. Thou art the giver of peace to my soul and very life." Sorry guys, I'm trying to find quotes that are not just on Pinterest. Guru Arjan says, "He dwells in a broken down shack, in tattered clothes, with no social status, no honor, and no respect. He wanders in the wilderness, with no friend or lover, without wealth, beauty, relatives, or relations. Even so, he is the king of the whole world. If his mind is imbued with the Lord's name, with the dust of his feet, men are redeemed, because God is very pleased with them." Let me tell you what I'm, guys, you gotta hear these contexts, because Guru Arjan, this is way back in history, okay? And so you gotta realize that people had to find some way to acknowledge a sort of collective archetype. And for many beings, many human beings, many of our fellow comrades of history, and this grand battle of history where civilization's enduring, they saw, it's like we can't avoid it. In the 6th century, people saw the whole world was one phenomena or one personality. It's like, you know, like, isn't it strange? Like, it's like, you can kind of say it's like this. Like, the secular mind sees one universe, Now imagine that universe had a personality. That's God in the 6th century. Do you see? So when these people are speaking about it, they're beginning to, it's like you can say the word God is another word for field. F-I-E-L-D. A field of activity. A simultaneous field of activity. That means the field is causing the movement of what's in it, not what's in it is causing the field. Even though we feel in the space continuum the latter is the case, but I don't feel it is. So you got to realize, there was something, for example, like the word Nam is very important in the Sikh tradition and mysticism. You know, I think I should read some quotes from Guru Nanak after this, which was kind of like, I believe, the founder of, was the early guru, the first guru. Anyways, let's see what else Guru Arjan says. I offer myself to the perfect true Guru, who is the giver of protection, the heroic warrior who always keeps his word. Millions of obstacles are removed in an instant for those who listen to the sermon of the Lord Har Har in the Sat Sangat, the company of the holy. Guru Arjan says, by trying to please other people, nothing is accomplished. And you know why, guys? Because people change. It's like, who can we really please? I think Guru Arjan was the 5th guru, maybe? So, guys, I found a picture of Guru Arjan, and this is pretty much this is the way he goes. It's tragic, but it is history, and we have to be brave enough to acknowledge it. So it was this messed up situation, but he was Mahasamadhiing, and I can't find the quote right now, but there was something in his quotes, like as he's perishing, as he's dissolving in this plane of existence, as a pilot, as he's ejecting from this plane of existence, he, in some sense, his last words are, he is not talking to people, he is talking. I forget the exact term, but he's talking to these lights. It's as if, as he's walking to the other side, he's also seeing who's there. So welcome, John and Adele. Guys, mind my accent sometimes, but here, this is the name, Guru Arjan. And you know, he in some sense understood the divine will, because the divine will is not a conceptual phenomenon. It's interaction with a non-conceptual entity, and anything that goes beyond the human framework, beyond concepts, is experiential. That means really the center of your gravity of your beliefs is your experiences, is it not? That means the ideologies are gravitated towards you that resonate to your experience. So if we consider that we're experiencers and we're not the object and the subject, then we notice the gravitation of them. You see, there's this poem by Rumi. I'm going to read this actually for you. Today I'm remembering a lot of good stuff here. Okay, poem. This poem is called Poem of the Atoms, and it's by Rumi. And let me just find this for you. Okay, there we go. So this is the poem, guys. The poet Rumi says, "O day, arise, shine your light, the atoms are dancing. Thanks to him, the universe is dancing, overcome with ecstasy. Free from body and mind, all whisper in your ear where their dance is leading them. All the atoms in the air and in the desert are dancing, puzzled and drunken to the ray of light. They seem insane. All these atoms are not so different than we are. Happy or miserable, perplexed and bewildered, we are all beings in the ray of light from the beloved. Nothing can be said." Nothing can be said, he says. And that's the thing, guys. Mysticism is returning to the source of experience through silence. And I would say I've created the counter advanced communication, where I feel like you can also realize your true nature when you speed things up, not only when you slow things down. The worlds that we live in and the worlds that live in us. Okay. You know, I think of it this way. I think of it that before I personally was born, and I think every human being was born, nature was moving. And nature was moving at a certain pace. And when human beings move with the pace of nature, they are in the river of that intelligence. I feel this. I feel that space is not just space. I feel like we're just like you see fish underwater. You know, we're human beings in space, right? So fish underwater, there are currents. There are currents that suddenly the fish goes into and may feel that suddenly it's moving quicker. Do you know what I mean? Like that means the current, a fish swimming against the current, it has to, it loses more energy. If it swims with the current, it gets access to the current's direction. So I feel that Now let's think as if human beings are like in an ocean, in a mysterious ocean, and sometimes as they're swimming about their day, there are currents. There are intelligent currents. I feel we're all drops in a living ocean. When the world runs together, it is an acknowledgement of the presence of minds. That means I'll tell you something. Every room you enter, for 1 second, assume you can see no one as they see themselves, and just respect the unknown presence within every being. You will be surprised how the life shifts in texture and like quality, like day-to-day experiential quality. It changes when your inner realms resist phenomena before they have observed the phenomena. When your inner realms don't resist the phenomena anymore. You see it in some movies where there are like these two archetypes that are against each other. They start off as enemies, but they go through certain experiences, they become friends at the end. You know, why did two enemies become friends? Because the new experience became a common language for both of their minds. You see, it's kind of like this, that we're not just speaking like normal language, you know? Like right now, as I'm speaking English, there is a sort of sequencing of images prior to the words. Now, is that a language? I consider it, yeah. I consider that just like words are a language for human beings, I feel all matter is a language for a higher dimensional intelligence space. So because it's moving in ways where sometimes it's random, but sometimes it's not. You know what I mean? That means if a person suddenly have you, I don't know if like nowadays maybe kids don't do this, but like um, you know, when I was young, I would play in the yard as a kid. Me and my brother would play in the yard, and we would kind of like, you know, that like, I don't know, 7 year old kind of kid enthusiasm to go see what the garden holds, you know? And so I remember there was an ant, and I let this ant walk over my hand, off the hand. And I was thinking, in the experience, not then, like, not when I was 7, I was thinking that, but like, I was thinking, the ant would be like, what just happened? The ant would be like, I was just walking, then suddenly I was taken somewhere, then suddenly I'm somewhere else. Do you know? So you see, the ant maybe can't discriminate or distinguish between the finger and the ground that it's walking on because it doesn't have the intelligent capacity to do so, but it does feel the warmth of your finger, for example, on its like tiny legs. Do you know? It's honestly like this. The human being is born, the human being is in an environment, the human being realizes that environment was contribute that human beings before that human being contributed to that environment. And now the living time, your lifetime is an opportunity to contribute to the environment. And you see, when somebody rebels about against something, they don't care for it. Have you noticed? When you get angry at someone, you haven't cared if you're rude to them or not. You might still care for them, but when you get angry in front of someone, that rudeness is like you don't care for their gentleness. You know? And I find in exposed to in the sense that, like, how can I tell you, if you're a little kid and somebody shouts at you really loud, you might feel like the next 10 places you go, you might not even speak. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like what is necessary and what is unnecessary, you know? I feel the whole point of considering ourselves as an independent entity is that we can do something about the conditions we perceive. Because the moment, you see, on some level, you can say there can be irresponsible mysticism and there can be responsible mysticism. Responsible mysticism is making you ignore what is here. Not ignore, escape. But I feel like because when you go and look at mystical thought, it's like, all right, the world's a simulation of yourself, so technically everything is the God self. You know what I mean? They had that kind of notion, but it would be a sort of inner extinction of identification with form. I don't feel that's what's needed now. What's necessary now is that there's so many conditions that the ancients couldn't even comment on because they didn't see it to exist. You know? That means when you're wondering which phone provider to choose, for example, you don't look at like Socrates. What did Socrates say about cell phone plans? You know, you don't. You see, philosophy is when things are being questioned, also with an authorization to be perceived on a general level. You see, that means like you don't want a surgeon that's a philosopher. You know, the surgeon in the middle of the surgery, he's like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a surgeon, guys. They're like, excuse me, you're in the middle of surgery, sir. You know, and the surgeon's like, I just don't know who I am. You know, I don't think the I am is even. I don't think I'm. This world is an illusion. They'll be like, holy shit, the surgeon mid surgery thinks reality is an illusion. So you see, mysticism, things have their time. You know, in certain moments, you gotta be like the passenger in the moment. Certain moments, you have to be the driver of the moment. You know, in your inner realms, you gotta realize you're the pilot. That's my whole thing here with these Mr.Within talks. I'm just trying to say that once we realize we're not language, we can pilot our experiences objectively. We just have to prioritize awareness more than ourself, and awareness is a collective activity. Pretty much your awareness increases when you see what's moving in your environment more than you did before. For me, knowledge was never like memorization. I don't know. The school is making people do that. Like in reality, if you have a deep question, you will remember everything on the way to asking that question. If there's a question you're yearning for, you know, that means there was a certain moment in my life where I was like, okay, I don't know what this is looking through my eyes, and nobody knows because they're saying there's the hard problem of consciousness. So what that means is it's pretty much a free domain of unexplored uncharted territory. Okay? So we don't know. We don't know many things. And what we know are patterns. But patterns we know can always evolve. So in some sense, the grand question comes, how can we have a static interpretation of a dynamic process? You see, we can't. It's only because we are doing things at a higher speed than matter is changing that we feel we have science. You see, in Greek mythology, Kronos was the first god, chaos. So when you see chaos, you also see order's birth and decisions. I can't tell you exerting your choice while you are immortal being is the best thing you can do, but there's a difference between mindfulness and there's a difference between intense taking. You see, that life is a sort of interaction. It's like the world moves a little bit, and then you move a little bit. So first of all, thank you, Peace, Love, Dove, for supporting my existential efforts. The question you ask is an incredible question, and anchoring the light for mankind's evolution. That's a very nice way of saying it. You know what I feel? I feel like poetry attracts, like the poetic vision attracts poetic vision, I think. What else might we do to assist in the shifting of the new paradigm? Well, in 2020, stay indoors and practice social distancing. You know? But let me tell you, the question is this. I think if we can find a new model to perceive something, we can find a new outcome to its destination, right? So the first attempt towards bring in novelty, let's say novelty was something that was happening, and we were like, yo, Terrence told us to help novelty, let's help novelty. You know? So if we were to, in some sense, I would say this, any system, any time I have felt an experience has changed me, it was because as the experience happened, an archetype or a sense of self that I was thinking literally went to zero in value. When there was that zero value of self, there was, what is the value then? Everything. So that means it's like we are constantly going from, it's an oscillation between zero and then a sophistication of dimensions. Then zero, then a sophistication of dimensions. Then zero, a sophistication of dimensions. So we are in some sense kind of like breathing, we are inhaling existence and exhaling experience. But you know what I mean? Like it's an oscillation. So first thing is to realize that the more advanced we're becoming, the more advanced the world has a potential to be interpreted. Okay? And I was like, all right, ancient mysticism, they're taking believe it or not, science and mysticism have something in common. They're both trying to find the simplest, they're trying to reduce the mystery of the world, you know, into more known context. But mysticism is reducing the inner realm, science is reducing the outer realm. And when I say reducing, that means we are breaking the atom, literally one phenomena, dividing and conquering it, and then looking inside, and then looking inside, and then looking inside. So when you go look at knowledge, it's not just branches, you know, even though they say branches of knowledge, you know, but it's more like zooming in and zooming out into and out of knowledge. Right? So I'm saying that treat your mind as if it's a camera, and if you're zooming in on something, that can become your belief instantly. I can believe everything is like right now I'm holding a coffee cup. I could believe this coffee cup is the universe. I could feel like the universe is shaped like a coffee cup. You know, I could start this whole movement. Yo, we are the coffee cup believers, you know? You know, a cup of coffee is the sign of the divine, you know? Like we can. But that's zooming in without observing how the phenomena is actually there. So you see, I think it's a sign of intelligence to see the unknown. I think it's a sign of ignorance to define or stamp and not change. So I'm saying that the question you asked, Peace, Love, Dove, what else might we do to assist in the shifting of the new paradigm? Shift your view of the current paradigm. You know what I mean? I'm telling you, subjects, it's not that like just because you see something in one way, everything is just in that one way. An artwork, by every person that sees an artwork, technically is adding a new dimension to that artwork. So I feel that when an artist gives an artwork out, the artwork is finished by the artist, but completely finished by the audience. Do you know? It's like it's like the extension of meaning. You know. The greatest clue we have to the true presence of our psychology as beings is that we learned language. You were indoctrinated into this, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you were given a technology before you realized who the hand that was holding it. It's like this. Anytime in any moment, it's kind of strange. I remember there was a time where when the external realm moved my inner realm wouldn't do anything, would just get changed by it. That means when I was younger, I was so kind of, I don't know, conditioned into this uh, uh, false security of identity. That the moment I stepped out of that egoic structure I was inhabiting, it became a totally new realm. That means if somebody came and asked you, how are you allowing yourself to be? It is so instantaneous that who needs to explain their own eyes in the mirror? When you look in the mirror, you see what's there. You see what has, from an elemental level. That means all our ancestors are the periodic table. If you want to see it from a secular light, you know, uh, we are all particles in motion, but the human existence is such a unique particle in motion. I'm like, whoa, where did this earth get the intelligence to create limbs? For me, you don't know, it's kind of strange because if you see the evolution of the elemental, you don't see a story in it. That means if we were to think of just on an elemental level, it's just atoms moving. But when did the atom take the shape of an individual to then even be a character in a story? So for me, sometimes it's when I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, am I being a creature in space-time right now? you know? Anything you care for evolves. Anything you don't care for, your attention doesn't endure through. Like it doesn't remain there. So we can say that even if there's a certain paradigm, none of these all those people in that paradigm are not perceiving the same. Maybe they have similar symbols, but they're not perceiving the same. Like for example, laws are like a language of society. When a human being abides by the laws of society, it's as if you're speaking the language of that environment. And it's the same thing. For example, when a person goes into a temple, there is the law of being aware of the significance of the space, right? So you can say, lawyers speak the language of society very well, very well. You know the possibilities of movement. I've had different views. I've kind of noticed that after some point, it's like there's a concept and there's a context to everything you get to know in this life. Now the concept is, and this is a changing universe, so either the concept is changing quicker or the context is changing quicker. Now if we saw the concept as the self and the context as the world, You know, when the context changes, the self has a choice to change or not. When the concept changes, the self has no choice. You know? That means when I look at my emotions, I have a choice what to do after I have them, not when they come. Do you know what I mean? I have a choice with subjectivity after it's in my after I observe it, not before. You know? What that means is right now as I'm speaking, like saying these words, imagine how many potential words I'm not saying. How many other parallel realities of the same sentence exist. So this multiverse theory that's in theoretical physics, we've already seen its expression in language. So what that means is the sophistication of the usage of language by children. For example, Noam Chomsky is fascinated by how children have this ability to suddenly learn language and have this sophisticated use. And let me tell you something hilarious. The more we think it's lifeless, the more we're gonna think, holy shit, we're atoms being this sophisticated. But if we thought we were gods, we'd be like, oh my god. So, so from one viewpoint, you can see we're a dissension. From one viewpoint, it's an ascension. The secular society is ascending towards the transcendental. You know, the non-secular, the religious, and the esoteric, they have descended from the higher realms. That's what all the prophets were saying. Like, excuse my language, but it seems when you look at history, like prophets have come and said we messed up. All right, now do this stuff and get back. Right, like that's it. It seems like that. You know what I mean? But this is the thing. If the world moves so much faster than you can make sense of it, you're going to think that's divine. You're going to think that's, anytime the unknown moves knowledge, it's awe-inspiring. Do you know? It's like, oh my god, look at all this stuff moving in this empty space. How's it happening? You know? Like that's, like that's, that, you know? Like, so this sophisticated use of language that Noam Chomsky was speaking about, I'm like sitting here one step before that being like, how is their shape? How is their intelligent shape? And I have my own theory of evolution and others have their own. And I feel that light is information. It's not just photons or a wave. Light is not just a linear activity. It's information. And just think about it for a second, guys. Imagine we on this planet. Just think of like what I said in one parallel reality. Now think of another parallel reality. Like see this in another dimension. Imagine we became such an advanced civilization that we were like, why are we trying to spread, let's say we became a type 3 civilization where in scientific circles that's a civilization that harnesses the power of its sun. Okay, so when we become an interstellar civilization, where I've predicted that it's going to happen in 3,600 years from now, if Civilization 2.0, if the great transformations for Civilization 2.0 occur. And what that would mean is that imagine we become such an interstellar civilization where like we didn't just conquer the Earth, we're going to conquer the galaxy, you know? And so let's say we wanted to repopulate the whole galaxy. We saw it's an empty room. We saw we're the only ones here, and we're like, all right, let's overpopulate so much that we overpopulate the galaxy. We shouldn't worry about overpopulation as long as we have access to three-dimensional space. We should just build sky cities and, you know, no problemo. I don't know. That was in something I saw. I'd seen. So you see what I mean? Like, and so anyways, and this interstellar civilization, imagine we're like, all right, why are we just exploring? Why not we use the sun to, in some sense, disseminate intelligent design everywhere? I feel an advanced civilization would, in some sense, use the sun as a marketing tool. You know? So I feel that the sun is, we gotta notice two things that have happened to all our ancestors. They have all been getting tans. So this rock has constantly had on, off, the light of the sun hitting it, not hitting it, hitting it, not hitting it. Now look at human morality, good, evil, do you know? Night and day, kind of like light and darkness, or inhalation, you know? Or exhalation. You see, this is all like representing the on-off of the sun. Our psychologies are echoing the on and off of light on this earth. So we can say one part of our intelligence is motivated by it's oscillating between the unknown and the known, the unconscious and the conscious. Now the design part is the mystery. Why this? Do you know how many times I've looked at my hands and I've been like, why this design? You know, it's like a mechanical engineer opening the hood of a car and being like, why this engine? Right? So it's kind of like, you know, you looking at your body and being like, why this design? So you can totally see evolution by just putting your palms on the ground. When you put your palms on the ground, yeah, it's like animal, like you're kind of like designed like an animal, you know? But when you look at the mind part, it's not designed like an animal. And it's kind of like, what is moving this? We are so, I feel it's a testament, selfishness is a testament to universal ignorance. That means, are you an individual activity? Are you just you right now? Or are you a part of the universe? Are you being a part of the universe? Now, the effort of civilization is to attempt to be part of a conscious universe. That means, do you know, in what you can say a symptom of a confused society is its destruction of its own technologies. Yeah, yeah, guys, Noam Chomsky is definitely a legend. That man has contributed to the inner realms of so many human beings. It's fascinating. You guys might not believe it, but like Noam Chomsky, I was sitting like by Tim Hortons drinking a coffee, and there was this other guy on this other bench to the side, and he suddenly starts talking, and you know I'm like, you know, just small talk and all this. It's this man in his like 50s, and he suddenly says he's an artist and a painter, you know. And I was thinking of like an avenue in the arts. So I was like, how was it? How did you? I pretty much asked him about his life experiences, and he authentically shared. And at the end of it, he just looked at me, and I felt like in his mind he was like, "Yo, I'm giving this kid gold." And he looks at me and he says, "Listen to as much as you can of Noam Chomsky." So a random stranger told me that, and I had heard a lecture from Noam Chomsky, but because I was so mystically inclined a couple years ago, like this happened maybe like 2 years ago, like I was more mystically inclined, but when I suddenly noticed the crucial element of how before any metaphysics we have to study how language is being reality behind our eyes. Like then you see the great contributions of philosophers. I think you won't if you don't care for language, you won't care for philosophy. You know, for the mystery of language. So good afternoon, Clinical Sword. Welcome. And the thing about Noam Chomsky, guys, I'll tell you, that's very incredible, is he has an honor towards precision. He's definitely a person with a photographic memory because you can see his eyes. When you see a person's eyes when they're speaking to you and they're explaining something, suddenly the person's eyes suddenly looks at one corner. That's when an image is being seen. Like I can, if a person talks in front of me, I can know exactly when there's an image behind their eyes. If they're talking, if me and you are watching, for example, a speaker, I can I mean, of course, there is a kind of oscillation, that whole sine wave like thing I've been saying this whole time. You know, that means to think that we're one side of a dualistic spectrum where language is kind of simulated in will be ignorance. And I see philosophy as an alphabet of concepts. Like every philosopher has contributed to a lens. They've just created lenses for the future generations to perceive the world through. Yeah. Honestly, this was the option. Either you help the body of civilization, you run to solve the global problems, for example, food, water, shelter, basic human living, try to bring people up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you can either contribute to the mind of your civilization. And what that means is that imagine we're in an unknown forest and all that our civilization knows is like how far a bunch of people with flashlights have walked into this dark forest. Okay? Now your human existence is an opportunity, is a flashlight. And that's when you realize the value of your sight. You know? When you stop comparing it, when you stop keeping the context film fixed. That means, if think of it this way, your sense of self is the concept, your world is the context. Now, people get pushed or pulled into self-judgment when the world doesn't change. Have you noticed? Have you noticed this, guys? Well, if your view on the world changes, you can't judge yourself anymore. You can only judge the self changes if the world is stable. If the world is moving, the self is changing, is moving with the world. So that means if you took your attention away from just how the idea of yourself is just the only thing to see and do throughout the day, you will be shocked with how much unexplored it's like domains of the inner realms are so unexplored. I'm just encouraging people to just start journals of their own experiences of life and contemplate it, and through their own articulation after some point share it. Hopefully by that time I'm kind of like, I feel we should create this library where this library, we call it the Great Library of Names. And so and what that means is every person, they have a shelf. They have a shelf, or they have their whatever. Well, imagine like you write something, and 1,000 years later, a person goes into this library and they want to see what their ancestors' inner realms were like, and you've written a book and it's been shared. You don't know, guys. Writing is going to smarten up the species at such a quick pace. But writing about what? Not about what people want to see. You got to kind of have a Steve Jobs mentality here. Steve Jobs, here's the thing. When Steve Jobs left, evidently the company stopped, Apple, Steve Jobs left and went to Pixar, and it seemed like at that time the company was suffering, right? And the company was suffering because whoever came in control after Steve Jobs left, or was pushed out, that person came and was like, the customer is always right. The customer is always right. And they were looking for what people wanted, but sometimes you gotta realize, if you see what people want, they're gonna want that for a millisecond and then that's over. So the wants are endless because every person has different eyes. So in some sense, when Steve Jobs came back, he was like, no, we build something advanced and we just put it out there. And if people like it, they engage it. So that's the thing. That's my mentality on life. It went from wanting something or running after something to now trying to consciously, with every breath, try to see the potentials of every moment, and just you live, you know. And as you live, it's kind of interesting. The more natural it is, the more you are like in a symbiosis with the world soul. So when you do strangely what on some level only your eyes are meant to do on this in this world, the world gives you feedback. You know what that means? That means we're playing whack-a-mole, and then if you whack-a-mole right, you're like the world, like your friend is like, all right, you got one. You know what I mean? So it's an interaction. We are holding back the mind's ability to animate externality into new dimensions. That means, imagine I put a cup of coffee and it's steaming hot coffee, okay? And I ask people, is this hot coffee in here or cold coffee? And everybody says, are you kidding? There's steam, it's hot coffee. Now, if on a long enough time, this same hot coffee will become cold coffee. So which one was it? Was it the cold coffee or was it the hot coffee? You see what I mean? The dimensions change. The concept is changing or the context. So one of them is moving faster. Right now, I can say my sense of self is moving faster than my world to animate it. But when I'm suddenly silent, or I've had certain moments where I've just gone in nature and sat down somewhere and just kind of just been there. You see, it's kind of that feeling you get with true friendship where there's a freedom of every person's inner realms, but there's also a sort of subtler game of just the event of the day happening, yeah? And you know, I had this vision that all athletes in sports, they should in some sense share their philosophies on how the sport changed their experience of life. I don't know how to tell you this, but like you see an athlete that dribbles like a soccer ball and just snipes the ball to the corner, you know, of the net. Like that athlete has a precision in their external realms. 100% they can have that same precision in their inner realms. Or one can even say the precision of their outer realms arose from the precision of their inner realms. Because the way I don't know how people are, maybe some people remember everything that has ever happened to them, they remember maybe, you know, consciously. But for me, it happens in waves. That means every time I inhale, every time I exhale, the texture of the thought changes. So sometimes when I'm speaking, you know, unless I just observe and let a rhythm move, it move with a rhythm, it in some sense with an inner rhythm, I can't like even, I don't want to say I can't, but there would be a difficulty in managing like consciously thinking about the breath and then consciously thinking about speech. When something becomes important, all dimensions unify for where that importance is, for where the attention is. So anyways, guys, that's it for the silent revolution behind our eyes. It's when your mind finds a mirror and you realize that we're oscillating between the known and the unknown, so your potential is how you direct your attention throughout the day, really, or where you direct it to. You know, some people, they can totally live a lifetime not caring what they are. They're just like, I just want to be something and that's it, man. You know, that's it. You know, what greater purpose can life have of just being this one thing? I feel it's just this. It's too dark to see, which means there's more to see. And if civilization is not attempting to see that there's more, it delays its own evolution, advancement. You see, there's this concept in Sufism, they say to die before you die. A sort of concept, even St. Augustine had this saying where he said, it is in dying to self that we are born to eternal life. Something like this. I think it was St. Augustine or some saint had said this, Christian saint. But I feel now let's take the whole concept of human civilization, all activities occurring in all the collective, all the societies that exist. I'm kind of seeing it like this. The civilization needs an ego death, then it comes out of its hopeless despair, then it begins building the new. As it builds the new, it re-strengthens. As it re-strengthens, it has access to more possibilities. That means, imagine you had access to, 5 of the most desired things you ever wanted in front of you, but you didn't care to get off a chair to go get it. Imagine the options were right in front of you. Imagine all that you ever wanted was in front of you, but you didn't want to get up from the chair. That's the sort of, the past gives you an artificial security, but it's artificial because the future dictates what happens to the present moment. We have to ask ourselves what it means to be a living being and then care for that meaning. That means you have to care for the answers your mind gives in moments. If you don't care for your expression, you don't care for its advancement, technically. Or you're just letting the world evolve you. The ability of the human being, it's like it took us 4 billion years to evolve, to have consciousness, to consciously evolve, not unconsciously. So the more conscious activity done in this civilization, the more there appears the aura of the advancement that eventually comes about. And mindfulness and conscious living can be simplified as this. Just don't bang the door heavily. That means some people shut the door, some people, they notice how this gentleness of the moment and they just close the door simply. You gotta endure living simply for a while, and then you get access to your own complexity. So stay true to your own simplicity and decency, and just live, and eventually you will suddenly get access to your own complexity. It's like this. It's not a sudden. I mean, it is a sudden kind of like, oh wait, everything was different than I thought. Like definitely it's one of those moments, but but you know what I mean? It's like you gotta let yourself be free. And so many people, they think they are free, not realizing even the thought of freedom it's not freedom. Freedom means literally to watch an opinionless moment, I feel. And then also the potential of what can be set into motion. Sometimes when I speak, you know what it's like, guys? It feels to me like I'm just setting things in motion in a vacuum and they're just going, right? So let's say I talk about, for example, geometry, then I jump into, for example, mysticism, and then I jump into, sci-fi or future technologies or whatever. It's as if these are like I've pushed like an astronaut a knot into space and it's just moving, And then as I go on to the different subjects, I suddenly see that thing I set in motion. So to have this view That consciousness is just being aware of how nature has set you in motion, and how nature has given an ability for you to also direct this motion, right? Because if I didn't have free will, I couldn't give these talks. I couldn't even upload them. There would be the will would not even care. That means really beyond free will, we're a collective being or nothing. But while we have free will, we experience the simulations of the individual and the linguistic simulation of the individual. And if we can not hate language or suddenly worship language, love it or something, we just realize it's a technology. Do you like love your car or hate your car? I mean, you might, if you haven't taken it to the mechanic, but I'm saying like, it's one of those things where it's just an object. Your use dictates its nature. And it's like your ideas are just subjects. The use of the observer within dictates their nature. And I think that's a good point to end off the talk, guys. Alright, I guess I'll say one last thing about the subtitle. When worlds walk together, is that what I said? When worlds run together. Or walk really quickly together. It's just a suggestion that right now we are at a stage of civilization where we are getting comfortable with our individual objective existence, and we're going to soon realize that would imply we also require to get comfortable with each other's individual subjective existence. But we should also have this attitude that we have to contribute some of the life towards caring for the civilization or doing something with it. It's like think of it this way. We're 8 billion inventors looking at just a bunch of stuff. Now, it's the will of the inventor that sets the design in motion to even have a utility later on. So for me, I was like, wait a minute, is society reducing people's creativity by having technology give them creativity so they don't have their own? And then I realized, okay, so this means we evolved too soon. Our inner realms evolved too soon because the technology was suddenly next level. So that means you just have to find a balance between. It's like a lot of life is not even about your belief system that much. It's about the speed your attention is projecting the meaning. And emotions come and go. We're not a pure rational society. You think scientists are bringing their results to a world that doesn't have imagination? All words, as far as I'm concerned, are imagined. Are they not? So we are imagining the symbols that connect to objects. So you can say the symbol and the concept, they're existing in the inner realm, in the subjective realms. So I'm telling you, when you realize that the language is kind of like setting the context of the moment. So it's like some people speak. I mean, you can experience it in different ways. The best way to speak is free flow, I think. That way you give yourself permission to just, do what you can. But some speakers paint the context first, and then, they do the big brush strokes at first, and then they focus on the micro. Some people start from the micro, and then they get to the bigger picture, Because honestly, explanation is the zooming in and out of a very multidimensional process that seems to be occurring for now in a singular dimension. So I feel we are in this spherical, concentric kind of world, and physical reality is in a greater sphere, which is the universal mind, and the universal mind is in a greater sphere, which is the unknown. So it's like the center sphere in an onion wanting to know who's holding the onion. It's like it's unfathomable because of its own dimensional dependence. I'm just pretty much what I'm saying is it's unknown. Your knowledge is rare and unique, and has arrived here after 4 billion years, and your ancestors enduring throughout history. And now we have to use this. We have to use what we're given, and what we're given is a very unique opportunity to see what's happening and to see what else can happen. That what else is the secret to no longer being bogged down by your past. That means the concept depression ceases to exist when you realize the past is past. What are you going to do? You know? I've done, certain moments of my life, certain foolish things. I've done certain intelligent things. They've all passed. That means I have passed myself in this life. Or a better word for it would be surpassed. I saw beyond what I saw. And when you look at the human being, everyone is. That's the whole point of growth. It's not just the dimensions are separate. The dimensions are growing together. That onion is growing. And this is a next level thing where it would be for the first time where I think astrophysics may begin, or let me tell you, it would be a moment where theosophy and theoretical physics meet, where it's the inconceivable moving the conceivable. That means when we identify with conception, how could you be any concept? You identify with that. If you think you're a bad person, how can you be a good person? You're thinking you're a bad person. And if you think you're a good person, how can you be a bad person? You're thinking you're good. You see what I mean? It's about, prior to the language being a mask for the world that we believe is actually the face of the world, it's like observing. Observe the symbol attribution process of nature, which is human knowledge. So I feel all of knowledge is in a spectrum. All of it is in a spectrum. And I think technically if I maybe spend like an afternoon, I can design this. A spectrum where certain academic fields, they take you towards the unknown. Certain academic fields take you to the known. That means those people interested in the medical sciences, they want to learn more about what is known. But those who are, for example, more explorers, they are more, or let's say the artistic vision, it's more about, oh my God, the unknown is here. What can we extract from it? It's honestly like the same, artists have the same, I think, wonder as, for example, crystal miners. Those people mining and suddenly they find a crystal. So your creativity is suddenly a moment where the inner vision is so unfamiliar that it deserves to be expressed. Maybe. You know, I mean, like I've seen so many, like I have a lot of friends that are artists, but I mean not that many, but like So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Right now I'm pumped up with the talk. If anyone has questions, it would be a good time to ask. If not, probably in 30 seconds, we'll be landing. This is your pilot speaking, not joking. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and keep writing. Writing is how the mind learns to be a body. Much blessings and namaste.